הרי מקשר עצמנו לכל הצדיקים האמיתיים שבראנו לכל הצדיקים האמיתיים שוכנע עפר קידוש משבע עצמם שחייתה בנו הקדוש צדיק יסודונה ונחמן ולכל חוכמה בנו נחמן ופגן נחמן ומן זכותם תגננו כל ישראל amen. Okay, so God willing, tonight's class is going to be on Purim. We'll do for the refuah shlema of all those who need, and God willing also for all those Jewish souls and everyone basically in Ukraine who's stuck or who's in a dangerous position. So B'ezrat Hashem, may Hashem protect them. B'zchut tzaddik, b'zchut the Torah that we're going to study, b'zchut Purim. And so let's give the names for refuah shlema. B'ezrat Hashem.
David ben Phoebe, Michael ben Miriam, Noah bat Nene, Abichaim ben Mazato, Shalom ben Yamna, Bishayu ben Tzara, Rivka bat Rachel Nisanel, Simcha bat ben Chava, Yosef Ezriel ben Chai Micha, Anita ben Shoshana, Aviva Dina bat Fani, Benjamin ben Ketur, Reuven Avram ben Mazal, Ford Devar bat Eshbat, Sarah Miriam bat Sarah, Yitzchak Meir ben Shoshana, Sarah Ras ben Chamadina, Chaim ben Esther, Rach Ilana, Bas Hindasar.
Moshe Rafael Nissim Kamil, Shlomo ben Chasiba, Meir ben Ruchama Lilian, Ariel Kabat Sabo.
Sarah's cousin. What's her name? Here, wait, one. Eva Shlomi.
Eva Shlomit bat Ilana Esther?
Yeah.
Can you say Rabbi Pinto? Like Rabbi Pinto?
And God willing, we'll do Leilun Nishmat, all those Neshamot for their Aliyah, for Lilian Rachel bat Aaron, Yaakov ben Avner, Menachem ben Sot, Clara Ruth ben Moshe, Eli ben Simcha Brouillou bat Esther.
This is Lilian Nishmat. Miriam Bas, Moshe Mordechai Aaron, Rafi ben Phoebe, Yechezkel Baruch ben Avram Halevi, Reb Shmuel ben Harav, Yaakov Shire, Reb Aaron Shire. You said Lilian Yaakov.
חזק וברוך. תהיה נשמתם בצורה בתחור החיים, בעזרת השם. So all those neshamot that need an aliyah, בעזרת השם, may they have it through the Torah we study, and God willing. So, tonight's going to be a special class, because we're going to go through Likutei Halachot, something very special that I found. The Rabbi Natan brings in the first Halacha on Purim, but we need an introduction using lesson 60 of Likutei Moharan to understand this, because we're going to speak about stories. Specifically, Sipurei Masiyot, which is stories of ancient times. And what stories of ancient times are here to do and how they repair us, specifically. But using that Torah, lesson 60 of Likutei Moharan, and Rabbi Natan has an entire halacha on this, it's much longer, I'm just going to do the first section of it. And hopefully we'll share some stories of some Hasidim that was studying about Purim. And maybe we could go through a few halachot of Purim before. But some concepts that Rabbi Nachman speaks about Purim, which Rabbi Nachman says is the highest illumination of the entire year. It's the highest day. It's higher than Yom Kippur, it's higher than any single day of the entire year is Purim. And this he'ara, this illumination that comes down as Purim, comes directly from Keter, what we call the crown of Hashem, which is the Ratzon of Hashem basically. But there's lots of stuff here that Rabbi Nachman speaks about Purim being Tachlit Yadiya Asher Lo Neda, that a person can attain a level in which he goes up to a place called Tachlit Yadiya, the purpose and the ultimate level of knowledge, Yadiya, knowing something. But that purpose, that ultimate level of knowledge is Asher Lo Neda. There's no knowledge there whatsoever. It's a paradox. It's you attaining complete knowledge, but what is complete knowledge? The second you know nothing. So Rabbi Nachman says these two concepts, which are two opposites, actually exist in the same place. And on Purim, a person can attain that whenever he gets drunk. As we know, it says in the Gemara, Rabbi Chia says that a person should get drunk on Purim ad delu yada. You know what I mean? Until he doesn't know between the difference between cursed is Mordechai chas v'sharon and blessed is Haman, God forbid, right? We're saying this when we're drunk, clearly, but Rabbi Chia says a person should get drunk to this point, right? And Rabbi Nachman says it's specifically to get rid of your chokhmah, your knowledge, to get to a place where there is no knowledge. But that's the ultimate knowledge that exists in the world. It's the ultimate paradox. This only happens on Purim one day a year, where Rabbi Nachman spoke highly against drinking too much. Purim, he said, it's the only day of the year where wine isn't grabbed by the klipot, or except on Chagim and Yamim Tovim, where wine is holy. The only day of the year where you do all these melachot, you do all these things. There's no, you know what I mean, laws of Yom Tov or whatever it is. but yet you could attain the highest single level that exists.
You can tap into Keter on Purim.
It is Keter. Purim is Keter.
So what does that like? What do I mean? What can I do to tap in?
Getting drunk, technically. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying it in a way of I'm drinking for the mitzvah. That's it. I'm not drinking for anything else except for the mitzvah.
And also, I mean, I'm sure you will talk about take advantage of that day to pray a lot.
Yeah, huge.
Lots.
You really need to invest that day. It's really, because everything in Judaism is hidden. But, you know, we don't take Purim that seriously. But Purim is
It's the ultimate.
level.
That's why it has to be hidden.
With the simcha.
Yeah. Everything is opposite. We get to eat, we get to drink, we do everything that we're not allowed on Kippur, but we're doing it in a concealed manner. We're going out there, and there's even some. I know that the Breslever Chassid that once said that Purim was the hardest day of the year for him. Why? Because it's such a concealed day where everything is physical, gifts, food, you know what I mean? All this stuff that we're doing, getting drunk. That you're not allowed to do this the entire year technically, or you're not doing this the entire year. You're engaged in another avodat Hashem, waking up b'chatzot, doing go to the mikveh. Here it's completely different. You're engaged in mishte, seuda, Megilla, drinking lots of wine and all this stuff. So he said it's the hardest day of the year because it's so out of my comfort zone. I don't know how to engage in this day, but the illumination's so high. That's the point. When a person really wants to tap into Purim, it's to get rid of everything you know and engage with the mitzvot. You know, so there's lots of mitzvot that we do in Purim. Matanot levyonim. You can really tap into the hera Purim by giving more tzedakah to people. You know what I mean? Not just to the mitzvah is to get to 2 poor people, right? Just enough that they can have a meal, whatever that comes out to. Whether it's $10, $18, I don't know what it is. The halacha. I've seen people say different things, but maybe it means to give more. Maybe it means to give $26, or maybe it means to give more money to another poor person that you see. Any person who gives out their hand in Purim, you have to give. Maybe it means going to get $50 from the bank and turning them into ones, and then just handing out like this. It means to take care and to put your focus onto all the mitzvot of Purim, doing that to the best you can with as much simcha as possible. Eating the seudah with tremendous simcha. That also means not being drunk when you're praying mincha. So think about these things before. You know what I mean? Engage with every single mitzvah that exists on Purim because you only have the day one day a year, and it's the highest day that exists. To pray for your zivug, or you know what I mean, all this stuff that we want to pray for, to pray for parnasah, but to pray to get close to Hashem Yitbarach, that Hashem allows you to get close to Him. You know, all these things that can happen in one day, that you're attaining the highest illumination, and it all exists in a place where you have no idea how it's happening. Because that's Purim. Rabbi Nachman says the purpose, the culmination of all wisdom is where you don't know. There's no knowledge there. It's a paradox. It doesn't make sense. Because if you know something, you know something. But here he's saying the purpose of all knowledge is not to know. To be pashut with the mitzvot. To say, Hashem Yitbarach, I'm doing exactly the way you told me to do them. So that's it. I'm going to perform the mitzvah of mishloach manot, to give one gift to a person with 2 cooked food, 2 ready foods to eat. That's it. Maybe I'll give 2 or 3. Maybe I'll give them to people that I'm not so close with. This is being in, you know what I mean? Having kavanah with the mitzvot. And putting lots of focus in the places that you need to, you know what I mean? So there's kriyat Megillah, paying attention to the words. All these things that happen, these 4 things, kriyat Megillah, mishteh, mishloach manot, matanot, evyonim, all these 4 things, people should do them with care. And then getting drunk on Purim, because Hashem says so. Not to the point where you're throwing up, God forbid. You know what I mean? To get to the point where you get rid of your chokhmah. And all this should be done in Kedusha. So, God willing, you know what I mean, in the merit of Purim, hopefully we'll try to take down this illumination and apply the mitzvot properly according to the way that Hashem really wants us to, you know? So, let's get started. I actually had a few stories I wanted to share before we get into it, and then we'll hop into the Halacha of Purim. And Purim is a very special day, clearly we were just talking about. It's the highest day of the year. And people would wait the entire year just for this day. Lots of Hasidim. I have stories of a few Breslever Hasidim that really touched me. And there's a story of Rabbi Israel Dovodeser, Saba, who, after his teacher passed away, he was left alone basically. He was living in Tveria, and Breslev at that time had a lot of machloket clearly, and everyone was, you know what I mean, spitting on the books of Rabbi Nachman, throwing them in the trash. We already know this. They were burning his books. Any table that would have the book of Rabbi Nachman on it would be considered pasur. Can't touch the table. You can't. Yeah. Can't learn from the table.
They burnt his books.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
There's tremendous stories about this. Even the way Saba came close to Rabbi Nachman, this tzaddik, Rabbi Israel Ber Deser, he found a book of Rabbi Nachman in the trash, completely defaced. And he had no idea. He just thought it was a random book. He didn't even know who the author was until someone told him, how come you're studying this book? It's from Rabbi Nachman. And he stole the book from him. But at that point, he'd already memorized it. He'd already, you know what I mean? His heart had already been, you know what I mean? Broken. So, there's a story of Rabbi Israel Dovodesser. After Rabbi Israel Karduna, who was teacher, passed away, he was in Tiberia and he barely had any money. No money, to the point where his kids died of starvation. It was that bad. He had a few kids that passed away. And but this was before then. This was after he had just been married and stuff. He was in his early 20s, or maybe it was late 20s. And he went to Yerushalayim. He took it, whatever it was. He traveled all the way to Yerushalayim. And he gets to Yerushalayim, and he brings back a guest. So everyone was making fun of him in Tiberia because he had no money. And they're like, wait, Rabbi Israel, or they're calling him Israel Ber, is coming back with a guest when he has no money for Shabbat. So they're all joking about him. And Purim's about to hit. It's Thursday. Purim's Thursday, Shabbat Friday, right? And he has half a lira, which was the currency back then. Half a lira was just enough for Shabbat.
In Yerushalayim?
No, this is back in Tiberia, when he just come back with the guest from Yerushalayim.
Okay, so you went from Tiberia to Yerushalayim?
He went from Tiberia to Yerushalayim and came back to Tiberia for Purim. And he's in Tiberia, and it's Thursday. And what happens? Thursday day, getting drunk on Purim, and he's with people. And what happens? The wine runs out. So he wants to get more wine, but he has only half a lira left of his money, and he needs it for Shabbat tomorrow. And he's like, bring out the wine. He was already drunk at this point, but he's like, bring out the wine. And they're like, we have no more wine. He took out his half lira and said, bring out more wine. Go get more wine. He threw his money out on the table and he said, go get more wine. They took it and there was no wine. They didn't have any more wine. They didn't spend the money. And there was no more wine left in the store or whatever it was. And they started making fun of Rabbi Israel. This person is using his money for Shabbat on this wine of Purim. And Rabbi Israel said, I remember that day like it just had happened, because I wanted to teach the world that the emunah of existing within the actual mitzvah in itself of the moment, you can't take that away from me. I was in Purim and I needed the wine for the simcha of the Purim. I didn't think about Shabbat tomorrow. He got the money back eventually. Tomorrow they gave him the next day they gave him the money back after he wasn't so drunk. But he said, we come to understand this idea of the mitzvah in itself. To take the mitzvah in itself and to be within the mitzvah. Forget tomorrow, forget yesterday. The worries of tomorrow are something completely different. He has so much emunah, he uses his money for Shabbat on the wine of Purim. Go get me more wine. And that was a story to the people around him, to teach them that this is the idea of what it means to be connected to the tzaddik, and to be within the mitzvah, to exist within the mitzvah, and to exist within the simcha of the mitzvah. As Rabbi Nachman says, the purpose of the mitzvah is to do the mitzvah with such simcha that you want no reward of the world to come. No reward whatsoever. If Hashem were to give you the reward, Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan, Torah, lesson 5, says you would reject it. That's how much you don't want it. You would reject your world to come from the mitzvah. I'm going to explain it. Another mitzvah. That's so incredible. Another story right now. Two Breslover Hasidim by the name of Rabbi Shmuel Shapira and Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz. This existed at the time, maybe 30, 40 years ago. Communism was very strong and Uman was closed off. There's a very famous story that this Hasid, Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz, made his way to Uman. And he went through crazy journeys, and there's a very famous story of how he did it, complete miracles, and he survived. A person who would try to go, if they found out you were trying to do this or that, and you know what I mean, that you're trying to go there, they would kill you. But he somehow found his way there, and he came back to Eretz Israel. And he found his way with Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, who was another big giant in Breslev at the time. These were two giants. And Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz gets there. Rabbi Shmuel Shapira hadn't been to Uman yet. Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, at the end of his life, went to Uman, spent his entire life always dying to get there. At the end of his life, he went, and when he came back to Eretz Yisrael, he passed away immediately after. So Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz gets to Uman, he comes back, and it's Purim. And he gets drunk with Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, one of his good friends. And Rabbi Shmuel Shapira sees he gets back from Uman, and he's jealous of the fire that he just had. So he tells Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz, let's sign a deal contract right now. You give me one tikkun aklali. Give me the schar of one tikkun aklali that you did on the kever of Rabbi Nachman, and I'll give you my entire Ramabah. He said no. Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz said no, I'm not doing that. It's not worth it.
Can you do that practically? Like if I
technically, if you sign a document with 2 edim, 100%. Rabbi Shmuel Shapira was willing to give up his olam haba for 1 tikkun hakali on the kever. Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz said, no, I'm not doing it. Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, they drank more wine. Rabbi Shmuel Shapira said, give me the least pashut tikkun hakali, the least kavana tikkun hakali that you had, the one that you did with the least intention, the worst one that you did. And after convincing, he agreed. He signed olam haba for this 1 tikkun hakali. They get drunk, Purim happened. Next day, Rabbi Shmuel Horowitz remembers that he made a deal because he was drunk. He completely forgot he struck this deal with 2 edim. And he told his friend Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, you crazy? You put me into this deal? I want it back. I want my tikkun haklali back. So they brought back the 2 edim, and because he was drunk at the time, he wasn't technically a proper ed, and he couldn't have signed. So they rendered the document pasul, and he got back his tikkun haklali. Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Shmuel Shapira ended up going to Uman doing a tikkun haklali on the kever. But come to show you the power of 1 tikkun haklali on the kever, that Rabbi Shmuel Shapira, who was a big tzaddik, we can't even imagine this person would have shmirat einayim like no one we know. He'd go to the desert and he'd still have, when he'd do Bodedut, he'd still put a blindfold on him.
Wow.
Why? Because he said, even now the Satan can get me in the desert when no one's around me. When he'd go to Meron every single month, when he'd be in the bus, he'd make the bus driver put cardboard on all the windows so no one could see outside. And even on the actual the windshield, he put cardboard, only 2 holes for the driver to look through.
That's crazy.
He said, and I'm not going until you do that.
Wow.
He'd stand in front of the road until the driver did it.
Wow.
Every single month for Rosh Chodesh, he'd go to Meron like that. This is Rabbi Shmuel Shapira we're talking about. And he was willing to give his olam haba for 1 tikkun haklali. So that was a powerful story on Purim. And the third thing I wanted to share was with Rabbi Israel Karduner. On Purim, this is Saba's teacher, Rabbi Israel Dovodesar's teacher. On Purim, he would clap and dance tremendously. He would be dancing the entire day. And Rabbi Israel Karduner was dancing and dancing and dancing, and he started the day with drinking and everything. And came to a point where he'd go out to the street. Rabbi Israel says, I remember this. He's speaking about his teacher. He's like, I remember when he'd go out to the street to scream out, Leodia, Leodia, Leodia. To proclaim. You know, and he'd continue doing this. Because the idea is to proclaim this miracle. To make it known to the world that we were saved, right? To proclaim that Hashem is the one who's doing all this, you know? And he'd scream this, Leodia, Leodia. And he was on one end of the town, and he'd walk down the street in Tveria to all the way where the Nagdim were standing. All the opposers they would not allow Bresev at all, you know? They were against Bresev completely. And he'd go to that side. And Rabbi Israel says, I remember, he walked up the stairs and walked into a house of one of the Mitnagdim. And there sitting in the house is the leader of that entire community of the Mitnagdim, and everyone's sitting there drinking wine and telling stories. And Rabbi Israel Karduner starts dancing in front of the entire room. The person who was there, I forgot his name, I actually wrote it down. The person who was there, who was the leader of everyone, of the Mitnagdim, his name was, I think it was Rav Leshke.
Tzaddik?
Talmid Chacham, tremendous. And he grabs Rabbi Israel Dovodesar and he says, look at Rabbi Israel Karduner dancing. Dancing like this you've never seen.
Wow.
This is awesome dancing. He said, you can't even understand this dancing. Can you understand this? And Rabbi Israel says, noted, this is the entire leader of the Mitnagdim, completely subdued by the dancing of Rabbi Israel Karduner. The beauty of the dancing of Purim, that he was within the mitzvah, that no one could stop him. He goes inside the house of those who oppose him and he starts dancing and everyone's subdued. No one could say anything.
Wow.
This is the power of Purim that a person can attain, especially whenever you're a tzaddik like Rabbi Israel Karduner, you know what I mean? Tzaddikim like this, that mamash, they're in the mitzvah Purim. They're just pashut with Hashem. Forget everything else. Forget your chokhmah. Forget everything. There's no chokhmah in Purim. It's just perform the mitzvot with simcha, you know? And that was Rabbi Israel Karduner. And he really did that to the highest of degrees. So, those are a few stories on Purim I wanted to share. God willing, that could be a good introduction to what we're going to do right now. Which is going to speak about Purim.
Chokhmah doesn't mean, it means like, because I'm a little bit confused. Chokhmah is like calculation based on what you do mitzvah, you're going to get this, get that. Like, you're not making calculations.
Chokhmah can be Chokhmah Torah. Like, I know one lesson by heart, right? That's a Chokhmah. Or You can tell me which concept in this, and I can tell you exactly where I find it in the Gemara. That's a chokhmah. It could be good chokhmah, but there's a level where it's above a chokhmah where you're just doing it for no reason at all, just because Hashem said so. See what I'm saying?
So
Like
that's a chokhmah within itself.
You're right. Like let's say it says in the Torah, right? You know that for kibud abayim, you get schar of arichut yamim, right? That's a chokhmah. You get a reward for length of days whenever you do kibud abayim or sending away the mother of the bird.
Yeah.
All this stuff. These could be reasons of why to perform those mitzvot, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there comes above everything else, which is I'm not going to perform it for any reasons at all, except for the reason Hashem said so. That you just do the mitzvah because Hashem commanded you to do it. I don't believe in the Torah because of these proofs or this or that. I believe in the Torah because Hashem told me to believe in the Torah. It's above all philosophies, above all sophistications. It's this idea of, yeah, I know, but I don't know anything at all.
But it's good to start with a little
You
bit
have
of
to.
motivation.
You have to. Meaning, a person has to have yirata onesh, a person has to have fear of punishment, fear of reward, you know what I mean? Or desire for reward and all this stuff. This is a foundation in the Torah. Only after you start working on yourself and doing avodat Hashem and getting to these places where you can ascend to a level where tachlit yediyash, you know what I mean? Where there's no knowledge whatsoever. It's just, I'm with Hashem, that's it. Finished. Everything He tells me to do, I'm going to do it because that's what He told me to do. For no reason whatsoever. Not because I want this in return. Not because of this or that. Just because Hashem told me. That's the highest level that exists, you know? And that a person can attain on Purim. That is the definition of Purim. It's the culmination of wisdom is not knowing at all. Or that even if you think you know something, you realize that you actually know nothing. Because the greater a person's knowledge of Hashem, his recognition of God's greatness, his infiniteness, the more a person realizes how small he is. Because if God's infinite, and you can perceive that infiniteness to a certain degree, you actually begin to lower yourself because you realize how nothing you are before God's greatness, you know?
Yeah.
It reminds me of a story that I heard that one of the biggest Tana, I think when you wrote the Bavel, you had the Talmud.
When he fasted, you're saying?
He fasted for 40 days, or what was it? To forget all the Torah that he learned. How do we say that? It's to come with a new knowledge that you know nothing, whatever you have learned in the past will not
That's awesome, yeah.
affect your new learning. So you can see that in order to advance sometime, you need to put aside your chokhmah to really start.
Yeah.
Totally.
Hmm?
Very
Isn't
good
that-
point. So Rab Zera, when he...
Elaborate on that?
So Rab Zera, this Amora, when he moved from from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, obviously there were two completely different Torah. There's Talmud Yerushalmi and Talmud Bavli. He realized that we know Talmud Yerushalmi is on a much higher level than Talmud Bavli. Clearly, at the level of where it's received from. Because Rab Zera knew this, he realized that understanding all the sophistication that I have with Talmud Bavli, which is specifically based on this idea of machloket back and forth, Shakla V'Tarya, Talmud Yerushalmi, it's complete shalom, that Torah.
Mm-hmm.
It's complete shalom. And if I were to have Talmud Bavli, it's going to present a contradiction to my Talmud Yerushalmi. So he fasted 40 days to forget the Torah he learned in Bavel, so that when he went to Yerushalayim, when he went to Eretz Yisrael, that he could learn the Torah b'pshitut, without any of his further wisdom. It's like today people fast to remember the Torah. He fasted to forget.
But it's not to forget, it's to have the humility that you need to start to learn with a complete new understanding that you didn't have before. It's not that sometimes, you learn a lesson, you cannot go back with learning that lesson with whatever knowledge you have from the past. You need to clear your mind. I always remember one day I went to see someone. I was doing Teshuvah, it was 10 years ago. And he told me, you want to get close to Breslev? I'm going to give you the best advice. Forget what you have learned in Torah and just start.
Wow.
I promise you. He told me that was crazy, and I didn't understand what he meant when he told me that. Because sometimes we learn so many things, and we go with that knowledge, and we continue. But sometimes you have to forget what you learned and just. This is what when Rabbi Nachman says you have to always stay new in your mind.
100%.
You have to go with new ideas and be ready to learn completely something different that might actually contradict what you have learned in the past.
How would that, sorry to interrupt, how would that
be possible?
How would not knowing, forgetting the past affect what you're going to learn now?
Because you have certain
Chokhmah,
notions
yeah, and if you keep them, it will not allow you to completely
to take in that new thing.
Like a belief system.
It's like tshuva, right?
Wow.
What's
yeah.
tshuva? When you want to do tshuva, Rabbi Nachman, I was literally studying the Torah today. To do tshuva, you need to become a beriah chadasha, a new creation. You cannot be the same person that you were, right? You want to go to the next level? Rabbi Nachman says, you have to become completely new. Forget what you knew. You know what I mean? Start new with me, Hashem Yitbarach.
Kind of like lose yourself?
Lose yourself and become the person that you're meant to be, right? It's like what Rabbi Nachman says. No, what did he say? Yeridat tachlit aliyah. The falls for the purpose of the ascent. A person sometimes needs to fall, to forget what he does know, to lose whatever he thought he had, to forget, to remember something much bigger.
So it's like, I'll give you an example, right? When I was like going through my whole religious trip, right? Like, when I was like not like really like involved, Hashem and stuff, right? I made my psychology my religion, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then that was my ultimate truth, right?
Yeah.
So then when I went to yeshiva, all this spiritual stuff doesn't match with psychology.
For sure.
Psychology is only limited to a certain...
Because there's something called faith, which exists above the human intellect, the
So
comprehension.
what trip. I had to like get rid of all these beliefs about like psychology and the way humans work, because it's above psychology.
For sure. All these ideas of science, right? Science proving the Torah. This stuff, Rabbi Nachman says, doesn't make sense because the essence of Judaism is faith. And faith, there's no logic whatsoever. You can tell any person every single proof for why the Torah should exist, and even coming out of that, you can still find 10 other reasons and 15 and 20 other reasons why it should not exist according to science. Why the Torah is not accurate, or this or that. The foundation of the Torah is emunah. It's a reference to the first sfirah that exists, malchut. We live in the world of malchut. We live in the world of asiyah. Our goal is to get faith. Faith is the foundation of why we exist. Once you have faith, then you can get to the level of chokhmah.
Malchut is what?
Malchut is kingship, but basically, the sfirah malchut represents emunah. The Zohar says.
Okay.
You cannot have anything in this world. Malchut is the foundation of all the sfirot. It's the lowest one. You cannot climb the branches and get to the next level, chokhmah, bina, all this stuff, unless you have malchut, emunah.
I thought Yesod is the foundation.
But even lower than Yesod. Yesod is the definition of foundation, but even before Yesod, you have to go through malchut. Malchut is emunah.
Wow.
So, what is emunah? Getting rid of your own chokhmah, that even if I don't understand why I'm doing it, I'm still doing it because Hashem said so. It's faith.
But it says, what is emunah when understanding stops?
Exactly, exactly.
Where logic ends and
Exactly. That's Rabbi. Yeah, exactly. That's emunah. So this is what it is. It's this idea of tachlit al-yadiyah shalom. Sometimes to know something, what is the essence of all knowing? It begins with not knowing. Right? This idea of faith, right? You cannot come to know something also, yadiyah, unless you don't know at the beginning, because to begin into the Torah, to enter into the Torah, it has to be through emunah. You cannot point at one single thing and say, this is why I'm Jewish today. You cannot, because you're always going to have another doubt, another safek as to why it's not real, or why it's this, or why I have another contradiction on this. No miracle is also going to make a person Jewish, and I'll tell you why. We see this from the 10 makot in Egypt. Even after the 10 makot, even after all those miracles, what did we do? We did the egel hazav. We did avodah zarah. To come to show us that these miracles, you can strengthen faith, but only once you have the emunah first. You know? And the emunah exists in a place wherever you can't properly understand and come to that conclusion in your logic. You know what I mean? It's above logic.
So logically, right? Let's say you set up your business, right? And everything makes sense. You do a little calculation, you do market research, your product is good, right? And it doesn't work out. That's when emunah comes in, because it's beyond
100%. Or emunah can exist in a place where you're not working at all and you're still making $100 more dollars, and the person who's working the entire day with a better business model, that's also emunah, because it doesn't make any logical sense, right?
Yeah, but isn't Hashem supposed to be hidden in nature? So like, let's say naturally you set it up, right? Really, setting up your business is just a keli, you know? It's
100%.
really,
It's just a
keli.
100%.
But you're trying to hide Hashem within the keli. You know what I'm saying?
Hashem exists within the keli. The beauty is, this is what Rabbi Nachman says, there's no difference between above nature and nature itself. Why? Because if God is the one who created nature in the first place, what's the difference? The way that gravity works right now versus if there was no gravity, you know what I mean? Or if we were on the moon, what's the difference? There's no difference in miracles. It's not easier for God to operate the same way that this cup is going to fall versus if it just flew randomly. For God, there's no difference at all. When a person comes to know this 100%, that there's no difference. There's no difference between me'ala teva and teva itself, above nature and nature, the supernatural and the natural. That is emunah. When a person has the faith that God can operate in whatever way He wants. He can turn the laws of physics and nature all over its head. Everything. We see these stories all the time when people are sick and by default they should. The doctors say you should do this. You're done. You know what I mean? In a month you're gone. And what? They outlive the doctors. We see these stories all the time. Jewish faith exists on these stories because God's existence above nature and nature, it's the same thing for Him. There's no difference. So when a person really believes that, this is what we call true faith. You know, that's the Jewish person. The neshama in itself is rooted in this. There's no difference between above nature and nature. It's the same thing.
Because nature is above nature is within nature. Because Hashem is within nature.
Hashem is within nature and above nature. It's all one thing. Why do we call it nature and above nature? The way God is holding this lamp up right now would be the same thing if He brought someone back from the dead. So we think that bringing someone back from the dead is above nature, but the truth is, for God, it's the same thing. And by the way, the beauty of prayer, Rabbi Nachman says, is that prayer breaks the boundaries of nature. That you could do something with your tefillah that can break and turn over the laws of physics and nature on its head, you know? That's the beauty of tefillah, that you can change the way God operates this world, because God clearly operates this world, right? With gravity, with all these laws and physics and whatever science it is. But in 1 second, you can turn it over. So the Jews aren't bound by nature. They're not bound by the mazalot, also the constellations, by these things which are natural, because we're above.
But you could be bound by nature if you don't believe in a Hashem.
Exactly.
Hashem could put you in the hands of nature if you don't have emunah.
So this is 100%. 100%. So how do you do it? Through the hashgacha. Rabbi Nachman says in lesson 13, when a person has hashgacha with Hashem Yitbarach, when he sees the divine providence of Hashem, and how do you do that? When you're close to the Torah. When you're close to the Torah, you're close to God's vision. God has a clear eye on you. For Him, there's no difference. The hashgacha is clear as day. For the goyim, though, it's very different. Because they're not close to the Torah, they exist within this realm of nature where God operates to them according to the laws of nature. The Jewish people, not at all. But the second you believe in this, you believe that there's a difference, God is going to act to you the same way as He's going to act with a goy, unfortunately. Why? Because you don't believe that God can do something differently.
There's no vessel for emunah.
Exactly, there's no vessel. You don't have the emunah. So the goal is to have the emunah to the place where there's no difference at all.
Yeah.
And this is what we call, what you were just saying, this idea of hashgacha, divine providence.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Nachman speaks about this in lesson 13, and a person does this, just like a person when he sees something. Rabbi Nachman explains the way vision works. When you strike something, it's your vision that's striking an object, and that object is getting pictured and being reflected back into your eye, right? The same way it works with Hashem. Habet mishamayim ul'eh. Gaze from the heavens and see. Why? Habet mishamayim, God gazes from the heavens. He strikes the object, and where is He close to? The Torah. Because it says in the Zohar, the eye has 3 shades and the pupil. 3 colors of the eye. Tlat gvanin de'ena ubat ayin. 3 colors of the eye and the pupil. This corresponds to the 4 levels of Torah. Ta'amim, nekudot, tagin, ve'otiyot. This is tanta, what we call ta'amim, which are the signs that you do, the singing. Otiyot, the letters in itself. Nekudot, the vowels. And the tagin, the crowns on top. These represent the 4 colors of the eye that we just talked about. Which what means the way God's eye works is for those who are close to the Torah, these 4 symbols of the Torah, His eye strikes the Torah. So anyone who's in the peripheral vision of this Torah, let's say it's this cup, anyone who's in the peripheral vision of the Torah means Am Yisrael, Tzadikim. God strikes the object, He sees you. Hashgacha. But the Goyim, because they're far from the Torah, God can't act the same way with them. Chatzi hashgacha.
What would you say for like crazy things that happen to like Goyim? How is it explained if they like see things that like are above nature, or like they get saved from like a crazy accident? I mean, maybe that happens to them and they don't notice it, or maybe they do notice it, you know?
So that you made a good point.
Of Hashem, no?
100%, but they're not as close to where Hashem's striking His vision. Meaning, God's vision, His hashgacha, His vision, His sight of vision, is striking a certain thing. That's the Torah.
Maybe they think of it as just like nature.
So exactly, that's what I was gonna say. It's depending on your perspective, obviously. A person who, us the Jewish people, we're bound. Our innate nature is that we constantly see things like something simple like this, like a cup of Coke, and we're trying to defy God within the cup of Coke. We see how Hashem is crazy whenever you open up a book, you land on a page that we were just studying 2 minutes ago. You know what I mean? Something crazy like that. That for us is above nature. For Goyim, God could turn the world upside down, and for them, that's just going to be nature again.
It's also, there's a lot of components, because what if they're doing Shevas B'nai?
Of course, Sheva Mitzvah Ben Enoch, that's also a component attached to the Torah, 100%.
Or they respect another Jew, or they...
100%. All this stuff.
So it's not like really like cookie cutter, like clear.
It's not, but Bipshitut, the Goyim and the Jewish people have a very different form of Hashgacha.
Yeah.
Very. What we call it for the Goyim is Chatzi Arut, half vision. God only strikes, but the image doesn't get projected in his eye and returned back. It's like the eye is a mirror. The second you see something, you could see what I'm looking at right now in my eye. If you were to look at my eye.
Yeah.
It's a polished mirror. Same way it works. There's a striking, and then the right there's a reflection. Or yashar or chozer. And this is the way it works with the Jewish people. Because we're close to the Torah, God's image strikes the Torah. And because we're close to the Torah, us too, we're also reflected in that image. And it gets hit back and it strikes the eye. It's the same way it works. But that's another topic. Regardless, let's hopefully hop on Purim. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll try to understand a little bit more. Because we're actually, it's good we mentioned that, because we're going to speak about one who falls away from the faces of the Torah. So, as an introduction, Rabbi Nathan brings this down. He says to look at lesson 60 of Likutei Moharan. To look at lesson 60, because there it speaks about how to stay connected to the 70 facets of the Torah, Shivim Panim HaTorah, and what happens when a person falls off the 70 faces of the Torah. How is a person saved? And this is obviously the big question we have today for people that are extremely far, that don't even realize they're sleeping. It's to a point where they're what we call a shena of 70 years. As it says in the Zohar, can a person, or it says in the Gemara, can a person sleep for 70 years? And then it goes on to a tangent of stories about Chonia Mager who slept for 70 years. What's this idea of sleeping of 70 years? Rabbi Nachman says this is all a metaphor for 70 years being the 70 facets of the Torah, and a person who's asleep, meaning he's sleeping, he's not even connected to the 70 faces of the Torah, he's completely off. How do you bring a person back from this sort of sleep? So Rabbi Nachman says, like this, and Rabbi Nathan is going to bring this down and he's going to summarize for us. The main power of the evil kingship, which is Haman Amalek, which is what we're talking about Purim right now, is whenever the holy Malchut, the holy kingship, is in concealment. The only way that the evil powers can gain much strength, Haman Amalek can gain strength, is whenever the holy Malchut is in concealment, it's hidden. That's the only way. As we know, whenever we're not doing our job, the Goyim have power over us. God elevates one and he lowers another. There's no...
It's crazy that you think that Amalek has the power because we lose our power. Actually, it's like someone was telling me, it's someone, how do you call someone who comes and lives into your house that is not...
a squatter?
A squatter. Amalek is a squatter. Mm-hmm. Whatever energy you have that you don't use is actually received 100%. By...
It's funny you say that. Rabbi Nathan has a Likutei Halachot of people who come into other people's houses and they sit down there. Until what point can you kick them out? Until what point it's theirs, the property. Wait, until an owner comes and says it's my house.
Can you re-say that? They get their, where do they get our energy?
Meaning
Amalek
when we don't
has
put...
no power by itself. It takes the power just because the light that you have, every neshama, every person has the light that you are not using, and is actually squatting the light that you have. But the minute you return the light that is yours, Amalek loses the power. It's not a fight against Amalek that you actually have to do. It's for you to regain the power that you are supposed to have. You understand?
100%.
So, like, let's say I don't do mitzvah that I was supposed to do, right? That energy goes to them?
Whatever light, whatever you are supposed to do in this world that you are not doing, everybody has a mission. But what is Amalek? Amalek is a squatter. It doesn't have energy by itself, because everything that is evil, has to have strength in Kedusha. So whatever strength you don't use, your Kedusha that you don't use, is actually squatted by Amalek.
100%. It's all the potential you're not using. Exactly. It's being touched onto Haman Amalek.
I understand that.
Because I was reading, literally I was reading his book, right? And it said it's about Bechira, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's by this doctor or whatever. He goes into whole Bechira and the science behind it, yeah? And he said that if you have a mission, right?
Yeah.
And you take the responsibility, tap into Malchut, right? And you have, let's say you don't tap into Malchut, right? The energy that you don't pick up, other Jews pick up, not Amalek.
It's always, I mean,
It's very. Someone else might benefit off the energy you're not taking, take from you, but Amalek benefits off the fact that you're not doing what you're supposed to do. It's the same way with Yaakov and Esav. You know why Yitzchak didn't give the bracha to Yaakov? The Arizal says clearly, black and white, because Yitzchak didn't think Yaakov did his tikkun yet. So he said by default, if Yaakov did not do his tikkun, right? It's in Sefer Likutei, I think. Because Yaakov did not do his tikkun, by default I have to give it to Esav because he's not doing his job. It's one way or the other. You know what I mean? If you're doing your job, good. Malchut Dikdusha is getting strength. Holy Malchut is having strength. You've commanded this kingship now that you're taking control. Amalek has no power. But if you're not deciding to use your potential, Amalek's going to start tapping into it.
the problem is not too much. We have a lot of light in this world. The problem is, how do we use the light? Are we using, we're not, that's the issue. It's
We're
not a problem.
receiving, no? Aren't we?
Huh?
A lot of us don't receive the light, like, because we don't have a
Because
vessel.
you don't have the Kelly.
Yeah.
You're right.
But, you know, everybody should have the light.
Everyone has enough, for sure. The Neshama in itself has stored within it enough light. This is what Rabbi Nachman says, whenever you're at the lowest lows. The only thing you can rely on always is that Hashem didn't make you a goy. That you're a Yehudi. That you're a Jew. Because that Neshama in itself has all the light that is godliness within you. You know what I mean? So you can annul all the sins in the world, all the negativity in the world, just through the fact that you tell Hashem, I have a Neshama. And because of a Neshama and it's a portion of you, you can't say that it's bad at all because you're saying that you're flawed in that sense. But the fact that you created me a Jew means I'm perfect. Right? I might have flaws, but I'm going to start looking at the good points I do. This is the power of Azamra. What is Azamra? It's all the bad, all the Aman, Amalek, all the Averot that we do is subdued completely. There's no bad at all. You're going to look at Mekomo, and this is a beautiful chidush. I was talking with Shmuel yesterday. Simple pshat of the pasuk in Tehillim is Be'od me'at v'en rasha. With a little bit more, you're no longer a rasha. What's a little bit more? The little good that you find within yourself, you're no longer a rasha. You're going to look at the place of where that rasha once was. He's no longer there. Meaning you tilted the scale completely. He's no longer rasha. Just by looking at a rasha, he might do bad things, but the second you find something good in him, you're going to look at his place, his initial status of rasha. He's no longer there. He doesn't exist. It's in black and white. Rabbeinu explains it to us. This idea that you can look at the place of the rasha, he's no longer rasha at all. But what's mekomo? Mekomo is actually just another name for Hashem. Makom is mekomo shel olam, the place of the world, who is God Himself. You're going to look at God, He's no longer there. Meaning, you want to get rid of the rasha. Look at your makom, your neshama, which is chelek elokam iman, a portion of God from above. He's no longer there. The second you look at the neshama and you say Hashem have a neshama, all the sins get wiped off. It's finished. So a person has to constantly find positivity, even if you can't find anything good in another Jew, just by looking at his soul. Just by saying Hashem, he has a neshama. And you created him that way. And with that, all the ra gets nitpater. All the ra gets subdued completely. That's the chidush, that's the geula that is this lesson of Azamra, to find the good and positive points in every single Jew. Rabbi Nachman says the geula stands on this point specifically. Because when you're looking at the mikomo, which is the godliness in each and every Jew, that's it. The bad doesn't exist anymore. It's done. You know? That's the beauty of Azamra. And mikomo, I think makom is gematria. Take the name Yudke Vavke. Makom is 2 mems, 40, 80, and then you have 180, and then 186, right? Makom. If you take the gematria, and this is Shmuel he's saying in Shara Kavanot, it speaks about this. Makom is gematria, Yud times Yud, then there's Hey times Hey, then there's Vav times Vav, and Hey times Hey, right? 10 times 10, which is 100. Hey times Hey is 25, right? Vav times Vav is 36. So what is that? 161 or something? And then Hey times Hey is another 25, which is 186. takes Yud K Vav K and times each letter by the letter itself. So you have Yud, the first letter times the first letter again. Yud times Yud, 10 times 10, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, 5 times 5. You get Makom, which is God Himself, right? This is looking at the Neshama within you, the Yud K Vav K within you, which each and every person has because of his Neshama. This is the Chidush on this pasuk that Rabbi Nachman brings down. That isn't obviously Pshat, you know? But there's two ways of looking at it. You can say, I'm going to look at the status of the Rasha, he's no longer there because I found a good point. Or I'm going to look at the Makom within the Rasha, which is the Neshama, which is the God Himself within the Rasha, and he's no longer there. There can be bad, because Hashem is only good. So it's the same thing with Amalek. And this is what the Arizal says, is a very big sod on the, in the Etz Chaim. On Purim, he explained this is the secret as to why we get drunk on Purim. Ad Delo Yada, until we don't know the difference between, you know? Why? Because Haman Amalek, that klipa, doesn't have any holiness except for the Kedush. It doesn't have any vitality except for the holiness that exists within it. Because every single piece of evil has to have Kedusha. Has to. We know this because all the evil that stems from the world exists from the Shbirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And what is the breaking of the vessels? It's God's light that was shattered. So what is the existence of evil in the world came through God's light. Just too much, right? So what happens? Haman Amalek has holiness within it because that's its vitality. It cannot exist without the Kedusha that exists within Haman Amalek, right? When you make a bracha though, on whenever you bless Haman, God forbid, when you're drunk though, and you bless Haman with this, what's the point of that? You're giving the bracha to Haman so that you raise the sparks that are within Haman, which is the Kedusha. But because you're drunk, you don't raise it to the point of where you give it strength. You only raise the sparks enough so that it takes it out of the actual goof of the klipa, but that it can't survive anymore. Because you lifted it enough where that klipa in itself has no more vitality, but you don't give it strength. You completely subdue the klipa of Haman Amalek in 1 second. Why? Whenever you're drunk and you bless it, because your kavanah is not fully in there. You're not giving it strength. But what? You still made the bracha. This is the sort of getting drunk on Purim and doing that blessing according to the Arizal. And this is what it is. We know this idea that tachliti yediyah she'el nada. It's like, right, this idea that we talked about. The combination of knowledge is where you don't know anything. This idea, a keter, where keter, everything is good. Kulo hatov v'ametiv. Why now does it say in the Gemara? Now we bless on bad times, ba'uch dayan emet, and on good times, hatov v'ametiv. Right? The one who's good who bestows good, and then on bad times, you know what I mean? Blessed is the truthful judge, right? Because we don't have a perception where good, rachamim, mercy, and judgment are one idea. We don't have that perception yet. But Rabbi Nachman says the perception of the world to come, this idea of keter, which exists on Purim, on Thursday, is what? Wherever you realize that everything is good. Judgment, Elokim, Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's all rachamim. It's all Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's all good. But Yom Haru, on that day, which is the day of the world to come, the Mashiach is going to bring down the Zat. Yeh Hashem Echad, Hashem Echad. Shemo is a reference to Elokim. Ushemo Echad. On that day, Hashem's name will be one, and Yud Kei Vav Kei will be one, and Elokim will be one. It's one idea. There's no separation at all. There's no difference between Din and Rachamim. You're going to realize everything was good. This is Purim, where we realize that even Haman Amalek is good. That is Purim. Even Haman and Amalek is actually good. Tov. This is the Chidush of Purim. That it's above all understanding. It's above all knowledge. That's why we can't understand Purim at all. That's why we have to get drunk. Because you cannot exist within Purim and be sober. You cannot. The illumination of Purim exists in a place where we can't understand it.
Yeah.
That's what Purim is.
She's staying. I gotta run. Shkoyach.
Hadak.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're staying, yeah? She's enjoying herself. Good. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
Hashem. Enjoy. You're always welcome, bro.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Kutia.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay. So let's talk back into it. So what were we saying? It says in the pasuk with regard to Rivka, whenever she has Yaakov and Esav in the womb. It's fun we mentioned that because it's the same idea. It's the same fight. One nation will be stronger than the other. There's never equal. There's always one over the other. Esav tries to step on Yaakov. You know what I mean? It's always like this. Why did the kingship of Achashverosh get strong? Because we blemished in food. This is huge. שגרם להם להיענות מסעודו של אותו רשע, על ידי זה התגבר עליהם, כי על ידי פגם האכילה הוא הסתרת פנים. How did Achashverosh want us to fall? through the seudah that we would eat at his meal, right? Through the seudah that he created for us. Why? Because through this he gains strength over us. Because whenever one blemish is in food and eating, what happens? A person can cause hastarat panim, God's face to be concealed from him. It says in the pasuk, it's in the Dvarim, I've hid my face and now there's food to eat. Meaning, when God conceals his face, a person can fall into bad eating. And when a person falls into bad eating, God conceals his face from this person.
Actually, the meal that you do on Purim, the mishte that you do, repairs the avera that we did
On the seudah?
on the seudah.
Okay. Also has to do with the Pagam of the Etzadat also. So Rabbeinu didn't speak about this. And yeah, this is huge. And this is the turning point. Whenever what happens whenever a person blemishes in eating, when he's not eating in holiness, bekashrut, in upright, proper manner, a person can fall from the 70 facets of the Torah. From the 70 facets of the Torah to the aspect of what we call shena, sleep. This sleep is hastarat panim, concealment of God's face. Everything a person can lose just through eating, not holy. In Torah 60 of Likutei Moharan, Rabbeinu speaks about this, and that's what I had open here. And this is all has to do with Purim, everything, because the entire miracle of Purim and the entire reason why we fell was all through the seudah. It all starts there. So now Rabbeinu is going to explain all this stuff, and Rabbi Nathan is going to go into this idea about Purim and what Purim has to do with food and why we have to do a seudah and all this stuff with drinking and eating. And this is why Rabbi Nathan says, this is why Achashverosh was advised to make the seudah of Purim after the Galut of Bavel, at the end of the Galut of Bavel, because we know the prophecy speaks about it, Yirmiyah, that the Beit HaMikdash would be destroyed, and 70 years later we'd come back, right? And what happened? All the prophets, or all the people who were next to Achashverosh, told him, make the seudah at the end of 70 years. Why? Because if they don't have the hope, and if they don't come into Kedusha, and if we see that they're not redeemed after 70 years, we could see that they're completely subdued. The Jewish people are done. Because they fell into an aspect of 70 years of sleep, below the 70 facets of the Torah. They can't be saved. They're not close to the Torah, then we have all the power, as we just mentioned, right? When is the power of Malchut, Haman Amalek, of all the evil exists? Whenever the Malchut Didushan is in Hastara. When the holy Malchut is in concealment. So what's he saying? At the end of Babel, the Galut of Babel, after 7 years, let's make a seudah. Because then we'll know for certain that they can't be saved. Make sense? Because at the end of 70 years of the Galut of Babel, the exile of Babel, this is sleep. Because what does it say in the Gemara? Is there a man that can sleep for 70 years? Meaning, can a person survive after a sleep of such 70 years? It doesn't exist. So, you engulf men in sleep, and our days were like years of like 70 years. You engulf a man in sleep, 70 years sleep, as it speaks about in Tehillim. When Hashem will return the fortunes of Tzion, it will be as if it was a dream. All this stuff, speaking about dreaming sleep, right? Rashi explains that pasuk that we say in Tehillim, that we do before Birkat Hamazon, all this stuff is all a reference to the 70 years of the Galut of Babel. What is this sleep? These 70 years, each year representing another facet of Torah that we fall into. So why 70 years? Because it cannot be more than 70 years, because if it's more than 70 years, we've fallen from all the 70 facets. So what's Achashverosh saying? If after 70 years they didn't, we fallen below the 70 facets of the Torah, which means we can't be redeemed. That's why Achashverosh planned the seudah after the 70 years. But he miscalculated, obviously. So, ועל כן בסוף ה-70 שנה, שאז הוא התגברות השנה בהכנת התורה כנ"ל, על כן כשראו המן ואחשוורוש שעדיין לא נגאלו ישראל לא יתעוררו משנתם, על כן סבר שלא יגאלו ויתעוררו עוד. This is why at the end of the 70 years, when the sleep was all the way at the pinnacle, you know what I mean? After the 70 years of sleep, what happened? We're in a complete concealment. This is why Haman and Achashverosh saw that now Am Yisrael would not be redeemed. Let's make a seudah. Let's celebrate. Because they're finished. By the way, this is completely applicable to now. Because Rabbi Nachman says we've fallen below the 70 facets. We're in an aspect of sleep that no one can imagine. We've fallen below the 50 gates of impurity that we were in Egypt. We were already in the 50th gate. Which means these 70 facets of the Torah, we're trying to hold on to them. But the similar redemption of Purim is the redemption that's going to happen now. As Rabbi Nachman said, Kol ha'atchalot haya mipesach, ve'achshav, ... In the Torah, Likutei Moharan, Rabbi Natan writes down, Rabbeinu said, at the end of the Torah, Rabbeinu said, all the beginnings started from Pesach. But now, ... Rabbi Nachman didn't finish the phrase. Rabbi Natan in parentheses writes, Velo siyam, he didn't finish. But what do we say? We understand the tradition. Kol ha'atchalot mipurim. All the beginnings are not from Purim. All the redemptions, all the significance of Purim, the redemption that took place at Purim is going to be the same redemption that we're going through. The same redemption of Pesach is not going to be the same redemption that we're going to have now. The theme of Purim is going to be the same theme that we're going to go through the same redemption. Why? Because we're stuck within the same 70 years of sleep. So it's no wonder that Rabbi Nachman is going to explain something now. Why it's so important to go and study these things that he's going to say, which is specifically Sipurei Maasiot. Why Sipurei Maasiot exists in the world. To repair the 7 years of sleep that we've fallen into. To bring the redemption. Why Megillah Esther has to be read like a scroll. Rabbi Nathan is going to explain all of this right now. So this is why they made the Seudah, because we've fallen from the 70 facets.
It's crazy because they say that the Megillah Esther is at the same level than the Sipurei Maasiot.
It is Sipurei Maasiot. 100%, you're right. So this is what it is. What did Rabbi Natan say? Until 70 years, until you reach 70, you still have hope that you're going to be released. Because at least you're tied to one facet in the Torah. You know? But what happens when you fall from 70? This is why Rabbi Natan says it was fitting that the redemption would happen immediately after 70 years, because you can't wait one moment. If you wait one more moment, you're done. You're finished. כי כשיתעכב יותר מ70 שנה ונופלים חס ושלום מכל ה70 פנים, אז קשה מאוד להתעורר מהשינה. כי אם על ידי בחינת הדרת פנים. Rabbi Nachman says, when you fall off the 70 facets of the Torah, it's impossible to be awakened from the sleep. It's very difficult, except by means of one thing. Hadrat panim, a radiant face. Now, what is a radiant face practically? He's going to explain right now. This is all explained in Torah 60, by the way. So all the proofs, as you want to explain why it has to work this way, look in Torah 60, Rabbi Nachman brings all the proofs from the Torah as to how it works in this manner. Why only a radiant face can bring you out of a sleep of 70 years. Rabbi Nachman explained in this Torah. Our goal is not to explain why. We're going to explain how this all operates into the theme of Pesach and the theme of Purim. So what is Hadrat Panim? Hadrat Panim, bifrinat ve'adatik yomin meta. The Mashiach, no, my bad, wait a second. Hadrat Panim, sheze i efshar liyot ki yim al yedei Mashiach she'yavo min Rabbi Yamenu. What is Hadrat Panim? It's a reference to the Mashiach. It's impossible to get redeemed until the Mashiach comes. When a person falls into a sleep of 70 years, you cannot be redeemed until the Mashiach comes and this idea of the Mashiach comes into existence. Why? Because what is the Mashiach? Mashiach is Hadrat Panim. He is the radiant face. As it says, Bifrinat ve'ad atik yomin meta. He reaches until the atik yomin, the ancient of days. This is a reference to Keter, by the way. Atik yomin is the Keter of Hashem. Atik yomin is a reference to God himself, but it's the highest perception we have of Hashem. Which is basically the old man sitting in the chair. The old man was completely white. What happens on Har Sinai? It says in the Midrash that God appeared to us as if he was an old man in talit. Right? Yeah? In white. This is complete chesed. What is white? It's chesed. Atik yomin. This is the ancient of days.
White means chesed?
White is complete chesed. Mocha chivra kichaspa. It says in the Zohar, a white as mocha, a brain, a mind, an intellect as white as silver. This is the ultimate chesed that exists. When Hashem revealed the 13 midot HaRachamim to Moshe Rabbeinu, he was dressed in all white. This is the idea, this midrash, this explanation. This idea of Atik Yomin, who's coming down to reveal the greatest chesed of Hashem, the 13 midot HaRachamim. Within the 13 midot HaRachamim is all the forgiveness in the entire world.
13 midot of Rachamim is the 13 attributes of mercy?
Of mercy.
That Tomer Devorah?
Is it Torah? It's Hashem, Hashem, Kel, Rachum, Bechanun, Erech, Apayim, you know.
After
Ken, Tachanun. Rav Chesed Ve'emen, Oter Chesed Alafim.
Isn't Torah Devorah the state?
Torah Devorah is by the Ramchal, no?
Yeah, but doesn't it have? Isn't that what it
The
is?
Ramak, I think.
It's when
Oh, yeah, exactly, the Ramak, Chazak.
But
Well done.
I think it's I think it's that or it's I don't know. I
It's
remember
after
reading
that.
somewhere.
It's about that?
I know. Do you know
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, it's Sichot, it's all Sichot. But why do we do those Sichot? Because it's Rachamim of Hashem. And how did Hashem reveal that? Dressed in white.
How do we tap into that though?
Purim. Because this is where Keter exists. What is Keter? Tatik Yomin. Rabbi Nachman is saying the Mashiach reaches until there. Rabbi Nachman said of himself he reached until that point. This idea of Keter, of Yechida, of Atik Yomin. He said his Torah comes from a place called Atik Astima, the ancient hidden one. It's all the same inyan. It's all the same idea.
Yeah.
A concealment, a place where no one receives their Torah from. You have to bring a Torah down from there, and it's so high, so high, it can only be revealed into something called a story. This is Sipur HaMasyot.
Yeah.
We're going to explain exactly what this really means right now. By the way, this Torah, lesson 60 of Likutei Moharan, big Torah. The secrets in here are, we can't even begin to describe. Even right now, the way we're explaining this, according to Purim, is secrets. Rabbi Natan's revealing that. You know what I mean? Until Rabbi Natan, we cannot say such things. But look at the Torah, lesson 60. It's a world of a different. It's a secret to bring every single Jew back to Tshuva from the darkest of places, a place where you think no way he can come back. How to have rachamim on this person himself. Through what? How to bring him back. Rabbi Nachman explains. So he says here, the Mashiach reaches until Atik Yomin. Ze b'chinat hadrat panim, kemo shekatuv sham b'ma'amar patach Rabbi Shimon ayin sham etev. Rabbi Nachman explained in this lesson that Atik Yomin is a reference to hadrat panim, a radiance of face, which is Mashiach. So it's only through the Mashiach that we can be redeemed from the 70 facets, from the 70 years of sleep. When we fall below the 70 facets of the Torah. This is why it says that. What's that?
Everything depends the way we do Purim, actually.
100%. Purim is the beginning.
It's crazy.
It's true. Purim is it's
Our
the essence.
responsibility.
Yeah.
It is. We don't see it that way. But the way we do Purim, we bring the Megilla.
100%.
So if I like, what are the
Well said.
Huh?
like
Well
if
said.
I daven on Purim, it's like 10 times more.
Can't even count how much.
It's like a
It goes directly up to
Friday
Keter.
stuff.
Yo,
Also, when Mashiach
Hibodedut
comes, we're
must be
still gonna
crazy.
celebrate.
Purim, exactly. Yeah.
Hibodedut on Purim.
The highest. Try to do Chatzot on Purim.
Yeah.
Tikkun Chatzot.
Oh wow. Even just to do Tikkun Rachel, Tikkun Leah, or just to do something, you know what I mean? But to try to get up early. Try to get up early before the sun rises. And to engage in a little bit of Hibodedut. Try to do Tikkun Leah, because there's no Tikkun Rachel, there's no Tachanun. Tikkun Leah, you can attain the highest level. Purim is such a day. Likutei Tefillot, I can't even tell you. Go to read Likutei Tefillot. Open up Likutei Tefillot. You have prayers in there that are above. Rabbi Natan said it's above Ruach HaKodesh. You directly tap into the channel. It's finished. All you need to do is read Likutei Tefillot.
Isn't it like I opened up Likutei Tefillot in first time in yeshiva, and it's a lot of it is like Rabbi Natan like repeats it a lot. Like they say like different subjects, right? You know how it goes in the glossary. There's like different subjects.
It's by Torah. Torah Aleph, Torah Bet, Torah Gimel.
Uh-huh.
All prayers on each Torah, depending on the
I
subject.
can read it like that. That's my Hibodedut. I can read Likutei Tefillot.
It's different than Hibodedut. Hibodedut is your own words. Likutei Tefillot is like the Hibodedut of Rabbi Nachman. Or the Hibodedut of Rabbi
Do I
Natan.
only Hibodedut?
Because Hashem needs your prayers.
Uh-huh.
Hashem doesn't need you to pray the Tefillot of Rabbi Nachman. Now obviously, the Tefillot of Rabbi Natan are so big that they encompass our hearts, that he put in this book the power to stir any single Jew's heart from the furthest of places. But Hashem wants your words according to the way that the problems you're dealing with right now. Everyone needs their own personal prayer. Everyone, Hibodedut. Likutei Tefillot is also another obligation. Rabbi Yisrael said, when the Mashiach is going to come, and everyone's going to ask him for the remedies, all the tikkunim, you know what he's going to tell them? You guys had Likutei Tefillot. Likutei Tefillot. We can't even imagine Likutei Tefillot. It's the highest single prayers that exist. Rabbi Yisrael said this is the Hibodedut of Rabbi Nachman. Likutei Tefillot. We don't even imagine Likutei Tefillot. Just reading them in simple words. If you want to go to prayer 60 of Likutei Tefillot. It's going to speak about what we're going to study tonight. I'm telling you, do that because Rabbi Nachman said there's no bigger enjoyment for Hashem whenever you take a study and you do a prayer on the study you just made. He says it makes shashuim dolim. It makes great enjoyments up there, great delights for Hashem. Since the time of the Bet HaMikdash didn't exist. And by the way, I'm saying that word for word the way he said it. Since the time when the Bet HaMikdash didn't exist, since the time of the Avot, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, delights like this didn't exist. When you make from a Torah tefillah. What we're going to study right now, if you could go to Likutei Tefillot and read Torah 60, Tefillah 60, you're going to go to places you can't even imagine. You know? And it's huge. Huge. So, we go back into this inyan. The idea is the Mashiach. Because the Mashiach taps into this place of what we call Hadachat Panim Atik Yomin. And only through him, or only through this Bechina of the Mashiach, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, can we be saved, right? From falling below the 70 facets. And this is why when Sheloni Galu B'Sov HaShivim Shana, this is why when Haman and Achashverosh saw that we didn't get redeemed after 70 years, because they made a mistake in the calculations, right? This is why they devised a plan to strengthen the sleep of Am Yisrael, to make them fall from below the 70 facets of the Torah. Through what? Achila, food. Because Rabbi Nachman says the main gateway into falling below the 70 facets of the Torah, you know how? Tavat Achila.
Why do we have a Savior?
Have what?
On Purim.
To repair.
Through
To Kedusha.
all your klipat.
Just the Mishteh of Purim, repairing all this stuff. Of Haman Amalek. It subdues Haman Amalek. You're repairing the Seudah, as my mom was saying earlier, the Seudah that we fell into in Purim. Through the Mishteh that we have every single year on Purim. It's huge. Also the Pgam of the Etzadah, the fall of eating the fruit of the tree. The Adam sinned. We're going to explain how. Because we know Haman is rooted within the Etzadah. Because what do we know? It's in the Gemara. How do we know where is the source of Haman in the Torah? And you know what it says? The Pasuk, Hamina Etzazeh. Have you eaten from Hamina Etzazeh Achalta? Did you eat from this tree? When Hashem asked, I think it was Adam, or
Yeah.
Hamin is a play on the words Haman. Haman exists at that place. That it's a dat. So we're gonna understand what and why dat. It's the tree of knowledge to get to the place of it. What is Purim? It's a dat, right? Yeah, there's a distinction between tov and ra, good and evil. Up there, we're going above the etzadat to get to a place where good and evil are one. There's not good or evil; there's just good. This is Purim, to go above the etzadat, to go above Haman. Amina etzazeh. Haman exists within the etzadat, but we're going to go to etzachayim. We're going to go to the tree of life. There exists only one thing. It's good. It's life. Even Haman is good. How? Don't understand it. Don't try to understand it. That will understand in the world to come. But Purim, you can tap into that idea specifically through the laws that we get.
When we did the first Avera, how did the snake convince man? Is that we were going to become like God, the knowledge that we were going to have. So it's actually, we talk about knowledge, and it's to repair the fact that it's the way, the knowledge that we acquire.
Totally. Yeah. It's huge. It's huge. These are secrets of the Torah that are directly from the highest of places. These secrets are secrets of Atika Stima, from this place of Keter. We're explaining secrets of the Torah that are mamash. We can't, you know what I mean? These are the highest secrets, the highest secrets of the Torah. And I think Rabbi Nachman, after this Torah, Patach Rabbi Shimon, lesson 60, which we're explaining Likutei Halachot on this, Rabbi Nachman said that was a beautiful wedding. That was a beautiful chatuna. And he said, it was only fitting if all the Malachei Sharet, all the celestial angels and all the tzaddikim came down to visit.
What was fitting?
After he gave lesson 60, Likutei Moharan, I think it was this Torah, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Nachman said, that was a beautiful wedding. That was a beautiful wedding, after the Torah. And he said, it's fitting that all the angels, the celestial angels, Hashem himself and all the tzaddikim came down. And you know what he said right after? It's certain that they were here. When he gives the Torah like this is something very special. That he's saying everyone came down to listen to this. Everyone. I think it's Torah Samech, if I'm not wrong. I think it's
after Rabbi Nachman gave this.
After Rabbi Nachman gave lesson 60 of Likutei Moharan.
All the angels came down while
he said that was a beautiful wedding. He said it's fitting that everyone came down. And he said, you know what? They were certainly here.
What a trip.
So it's very deep stuff what we're speaking about here. And we know this. If you need to get into this. So this is what Rabbi Nachman is explaining. This is why, what do you call it? Haman wanted to make us fall and Achashverosh wanted to make us fall through food. Because it's through food one loses their face. Literally. A person can lose their face. Wow. They wanted Bnei Israel to benefit from the Seudah to completely lose all their 70 facets. For good. Done. And what happened?
Achashverosh was evil then.
100%. The worst.
He was not like...
Yeah, there's an argument in the Gemara that says he was foolish, but it's not important. You see the devised plan that he literally did with Haman to get to the place where he, you know what I mean? He could have this power. Malchut HaResha, it's Haman, Achashverosh, it's all the same thing.
But the thing is, how come they had so much chachma to understand these concepts just to bring us down, you know?
Because we have tremendous chokhmah, so they too also had a tremendous chokhmah. It's all the same thing, you know what I mean?
It's like literally malchut, so yeah.
Of course. So what happens after? He made the mistake we talked about. And this is what it says. The entire reason why he made that seudah was to make Am Yisrael fall into food that weren't that were forbidden.
You know it was kosher? You're saying from the seudah or
From the seudah.
Non-kosher.
I thought it was kosher.
Even if it was, that they say that there's some opinion that say that, the Midrash says that they came to the place that they would. The Midrash says that Am Yisrael would eat so much that they would make themselves throw up to eat more.
That's like lust.
That bad.
That's lust at its finest.
Exactly. So that's Tavat Achira, eating too quickly. You know, I mean, Nachman explains things that Mamash, you can lose your face, your figure, your tzelem elokim just through food, just through eating. So
To do the opposite on Purim. That's what you're saying.
you're going to eat because the food in itself has complete kusha.
Wow.
There's no grasp of Haman Amalek.
It's repaired, no?
Yeah, but everything
That's
is
what
done,
I'm saying.
everything in the order. You have to listen to the Megillah. You cannot eat before the Megillah, or else you're breaking this concept. You're damaging. You cannot eat before the Megillah. You have to give matanot levanim, mishloach manot. You know what I mean? All these things enhance the mitzvah of the seudah. When you're performing all these things with the best possible, when you're preparing for the Megillah, you're listening to the words of Megillah, then you go into the seudah. You know, all this stuff. You do proper brachot. You want to do birkat Hamazon. All this stuff is enhancing.
I didn't know that the wine that they were drinking were kosher. Was kosher and everything.
Everything was kosher, no?
That's what I hear in this. That's what I
Purposely
hear.
made it kosher so that they think, you know?
But it's very unique. I don't know.
Fine
It's very
minds
unique
everywhere.
stuff.
Fine minds everywhere.
Very. But all this stuff is all for this, so that they would fall below the 70 facets of the Torah. And I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit. That way we can move through this. This is why Haman plotted to kill Vashti at the Seudah, right? When Achashverosh tried to bring her out and she wouldn't come out. All was Haman's plan. This was all the advice of the Yetzer Hara, and its intention. Why? So that Esther would be appointed, and what? Esther would be brought to the king, concealed. The Shekhinah, who's Esther, who we literally say was the last person to have direct lineage of Malchut from Shaul. Esther was the last person of all the Jewish people to have direct lineage to Shaul. What happened? Shaul was direct, who was king? She falls into what? The hands of Achashverosh, Malchut HaResha. Everything Haman devised was to conceal the Shekhinah within the depths of, you know what I mean? By the way, the story of the lost princess, I wanted to get to this, but the story of the lost princess is this entire story. The entire thing. Everything. Look at the story of the lost princess, you'll see the entire story of Purim within that. Why she was taken to the house of the not good one, to the house of the evil king, and then the viceroy of the king is trying to save her. It's Mordechai. All this stuff is all a reference to the story of Purim.
That's crazy.
Why the viceroy has to fast for a year and not eat from the tree, because Haman don't drink the wine. It's all this deep stuff. Hamina etzazeh, because Haman is the tree. He's not supposed to eat from the tree because he cannot fall into the clip of Haman. And what happens? He eats, and then what happens right after? He falls asleep. Because what did we say? When a person falls into wrong eating, he falls into Bechina of Shina.
But
Esther was
Esther
a
is-
descendant of Shaul Melech,
Yeah.
and Shaul didn't kill
Agag
Melech,
also.
so
That's awesome.
that's so interesting.
That's amazing also.
That's crazy.
Because Haman's from Melech, right?
Totally. That's amazing actually. So Esther come to repair. That's awesome. Yeah. For sure.
Esther's like a Muna in a way. Because
For sure.
the princess is a Muna in the story, no?
Totally. So we see here the depth of, by the way, the story of the lost princess. I wanted to get to it, but you see here on the story that the viceroy of the king has to wait and not eat from that tree, and then only after the year can he eat, but that he breaks it on the day before. And what happens? He falls into sleep. And the second time around, he drinks from the wine and he falls into sleep for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
because he fell from the 70 facets of the Torah. But what happened? The Shekhinah is constantly coming to comfort her. The lost princess comes to comfort him and to write tears and to explain to him how to find me.
Yeah.
Because as long as you have hope, tikva, then at least you're good. Falling below 70 years of sleep is to come to bring to someone to a place where you have no hope. That was Achashverosh and Haman's plan. This is why this final redemption is going to happen through this theme. Sipur Masio. The story of the lost princess is the story of the redemption. This is why Rabbi Nachman at the end didn't explain how he finds her. Because he said this is the way the Mashiach is going to be revealed. So it's all directly correlated. The Torah of Rabbi Nachman is very deep in this. And this is why Torah 60 of Likutei Moharan is the Torah of Sipur Masiot. This is the Torah a person studies before one studies Sipur Masiot. Especially before the lost princess. Because these stories of Sipur Masiot are all hidden within here. And here Rabbi Nathan is explaining the entire secret. Here you have Sipur Masiot within the Torah. It's awesome. It's an awesome thing. So here he goes into this and he continues. And he says that this was all the goal in order to bring the Malchut, the holy Malchut, which is Esther, who the Shekhinah, into the concealment within the Achashverosh and Haman. This was all the plan. But the truth was, Mordechai had the strength to reveal the concealed, to bring back the Shekhinah. He's a tzaddik. But what does Mordechai represent? That we just talked about. Mordechai had the power to redeem Am Yisrael and redeem the Malchut, the Kedusha, the holiness from the sin that we did in eating, to bring them back up from the 70 years of sleep. Mordechai and Rav Chesed, abundant kindness, which is one of the attributes of Hashem, 13 midot, same gematria. Rabbi Nachman explains. Mordechai and Rav Chesed, same gematria. Mordechai is that abundant kindness. And what's abundant kindness? Bechinat hadrat panim, radiant face. Bechinat atik yomin, bechinat sipur masiot. The what you call atik yomin, the ancient of days. And what's ancient of days? God Himself. It's this idea, that place, that Torah that comes from that place of Keter, which is what? Sipur masiot. Mordechai represents Sipur Masiot. Shel Shanim Kadmoniot, of ancient years specifically, not just any Sipur Masiot. There has to be Sipur Masiot from ancient years. And through this one is able to be awakened from a sleep of 70 years. And he continues. We see the entire redemption took place at Purim through the stories that Mordechai told. That it says, Mordechai told Esther, the queen. What did he tell her? Stories. He told her exactly what had happened. He was telling her exactly the stories that were happening around the town. What are the stories? Sipur Masiot. Because the concealment was that Esther was in the hands of the king of Achashverosh, that the Shekhinah was concealed within it, and he's telling stories to wake her up from the 70 years of sleep. To reveal that which was hidden, to wake Am Yisrael from the sleep. Through these, which are what? Sipur Masiot. And this is how it happened in the end. This is how the redemption took place. It says, that night, the sleep of the king was interrupted. It says in the Megilla. And when it said, we know this rule, when it says just Melech and not Achashverosh after, what is it a reference to? God Himself. What does it say in the Gemara Masechet Megillah? Shinat Malko Shel Olam. The sleep of the king of the world was interrupted.
When does it say that?
It said in the Gemara Masechet Megillah that it's not the sleep of Achashverosh was interrupted, the sleep of Hashem. So what is the sleep of Hashem? It's this idea of Mordechai awakened up there the sleep, because down here for a sleep there's a physical thing. There's something up there that gets reflected. Because we know all our actions down here are mirrored up there also. Rabbi Nathan's going to explain this in a little bit. What? I'm almost done. Alright, sure. I just have a few lines. And he commanded to bring the book of Chronicles, the words of days. And there he found what? What Mordechai told Achashverosh that saved him from these two plotters that tried to kill him. To bring the book of Chronicles. What's the book of Chronicles? So the king, Hashem himself, was brought the book of Chronicles. Ahasuerus. The king's sleep was interrupted. God's sleep was interrupted. So what was brought to him? The book of Chronicles. What's the book of Chronicles? Sipurim Masiot. He found the ancient tales of Mordechai, who is Rav Chesed, who is abundant kindness. Through the stories, the ancient stories that Mordechai told Esther, and what is Esther? The community of Am Yisrael. This is the Shekhinah, the divine presence herself. That she was in concealment. What happened? Through this, he wakened them up and he brought them back to life. He brought them back with tshuva. Through this, he caused an awakening up there of sleep. Awakening of sleep up there in the supernal realms. We see that the king's sleep was interrupted. Hashem's sleep was interrupted. Because whenever we do an action down here, we cause an action up there. We cause an arousal up there.
Yeah.
This is what it says. That Esther said to the king in the name of Mordechai. Why? Because Esther, who's the Shekhinah, now she was able to have an opening that she can now advocate good for Am Yisrael. Why? Because Mordechai revealed that which was hidden. He brought the Sipurim Masiot into existence. Because she told the king of the world, Hashem, she brought to God himself the ancient tales of Mordechai. And through this was the awakening of the sleep. So why is it that we have to read the Megillah every single generation, Rabbi Nathan says? And why we have to spread it out on the table? 100%. The Sipurim Masiot. To awaken Hashem from the sleep. Not the sleep that... To awaken Hashem from the 70 years of sleep that... The Shekhinah is in the 70 years, unfortunately. Us. But what's through the Sipurim Masiot? That the tzaddik that brings up there. That Esther brought in the name of Mordechai was a tzaddik. What happened? Hashem awakens us. And that's how he brings the redemption, through Purim. This is why it says, all the beginnings were from Pesach. But now, everything's from Purim. Everything. Because what? This is the way to wake ourselves up from the sleep, which we're in right now. We're below 7 years of sleep. The redemption's been, the Galut's been 2,000 something years. So this is what it is. This is why we have to spread it out like a scroll, it says in the Halacha. Why we have to lay out the Megillah completely like this. And we can't just have it rolled and then just move. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, even the spreading out of the Megillah represents?
Of course. It represents a letter. It represents a scroll. It represents a tale that a person reads. Everything is to represent this idea of Sipurim Masiot. This is what it says. And according to this reason, you have to spread it out like a scroll. Just like you read from like a tale, you know, all this stuff that Rabbi Nathan says. And through this, when a person reads the Megillah every single year, what happens is you wake ourselves from the sleep every single year. We bring ourselves closer to redemption. And what? And this is what it says. What did it say? In Ta'anit, Gemara Ta'anit, it says like, my bad, it says in Esther. And these days will be remembered and be commemorated every single year. Why? Because through this concept of Sipurim Masiot that we bring back to Hashem Yisbach, through the story of the Megillah, you bring back the Sipurim Masiot to Hashem, which now we fall into the aspect of Zikaron, memory, which is the opposite of Haman Amalek, which is Shichecha, forgetfulness. We attain memory. This is the Geulah. So, we went through a lot there. The Bezrat Hashem, and the merit of Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Natan, all the true tzaddikim. May we have a true Purim, Bezrat Hashem, and obtain a true illumination, so that we can see the redemption. Ad Hashem.